Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the ninth live episode of Misplaced by Livin Farms. During this series, we talk about problems within our food systems and we invite entrepreneurs, advocates, and experts to share their solutions. This month, I think, is particularly important to have this conversation. This week, on the 22nd of April, we celebrate Earth Day. And next week, on the 28th of April, we celebrate Stop Food Waste Day. And we did start the food waste conversation in many of our prior episodes, but also in particular last week with an episode with our own CTO, Thomas Riehl, who introduced us to insect technologies and food waste management. So if you haven't seen it, check out our YouTube channel. You'll find it there. This week, we bring this conversation around food waste forward. And we have another guest that really has this problem of food waste at heart. So we invited Philippe Schuler from Too Good To Go. Hi, Philippe. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Christina. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to hear more from you. Before I pass it on to you, I'll just give a little bit of an introduction about you, but I'll leave it to you to tell us your story. Philippe is the Global Impact Manager at Too Good To Go, and he builds private and private sector partnerships to further his mission of a planet with no food waste. His journey in the world of food waste started with his master thesis on the supply chain of potatoes. He discovered how much food waste was happening in the fresh potato supply chain. And after graduating and after this study, he began working with leisure and hospitality in Thailand and the Maldives. So he started there his journey to combat food waste. Now, Philippe's goal is to show individuals, businesses, and governments that we can move towards a food waste prevention, and that this makes sense financially, socially, and also environmentally. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to you, Philippe, to talk to us about your take on solutions to food waste.
Great. Thank you very much, Christina, first of all, for the invitation, but also for the great introduction. I'll just share my screen. 1 second. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I can see it. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So hello, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in. As Christina mentioned, I'm Philip. I'm part of Too Good To Go. And today I'll be speaking to you about the problem of food waste, a little bit more on my experiences as well within the issue, what each and every one of us can do about it, and also a little bit more on what Too Good To Go does in order to fight food waste by building a movement. And food waste is really a massive, massive issue. Some of you might have heard of the statistic that 1/3 of all the food that is being produced around the world is going to waste every single day of the year. And that equates to 51 tons of food wasted every single second. So this has many different implications as socially, environmentally, economically, but also in terms of us, we're so close to food. We rely on food as humanity. And for us to let that go to waste is simply unacceptable. And for me, really, what really gets me out of bed every single morning, though, is that by fighting food waste, it is really also the best opportunity to tackle the 3 greatest challenges of our time. We all know that we're in the middle of a climate crisis. We know that greenhouse gas emissions are going up. We also know now that the food system is one of the biggest contributors to these greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to find solutions to adapt and to mitigate to the crisis that is happening right now and will happen in the future as well. At the same time, we also have a growing population. By 2050, it is estimated will be 10 billion people on this planet. So we need a lot of space for us to be able to survive in that sort of scenario. And we will need more and more food in a certain way for us to sustain ourselves. But instead of producing more food, why don't we just make sure that we don't waste it instead and build a sustainable that provides enough food for everybody to come in, people that are currently going to bed hungry around the world. The third issue, of course, and you see that also in the news, whether you saw it with the Amazon, with the water crisis, it is really happening right now. We are depleting our natural resources at an unprecedented rate. And the vast majority of that is due to how we produce and also consume our food. And this also has massive implications for us as humanity. But the encouraging sign of all of this is that by fighting food waste, we can really heads-on tackle these three biggest challenges. Because when we're wasting food, we're not only wasting the produce, but we're also wasting the valuable resources within, such as the land. Imagine all the agricultural land that we need to produce all of this food. And as we're growing, we'll need to cut down even more and more forests. And that means a massive amount of deforestation. Secondly, we also need a lot of labor. We need a lot of effort, tears, and sweat from the farmers to be able to actually harvest all of this produce. So imagine that in the end, after a long supply chain, going to waste is simply unacceptable. Then the third one is fertilizers. Still nowadays, production around the world is still not completely organic. So we're using fertilizers and pesticides to produce our food. But if we're wasting it, we're also wasting that in vain as well. Water, I think, is the most important one out of all of this as well, because when people think about actions that they can do in their daily lives, a lot of people think, let me take a shower that is 4 minutes long instead of taking one that is 7 minutes long. And that is, of course, all good and all nice and good. But we have to remember that only 5% of all the fresh water that we're using is currently used on our everyday lives, while 70% of that is simply to irrigate our food. So we are drinking 1 or 2 liters of water a day to stay healthy, but we are actually eating food and eating the water within it that actually equates to up to 2,500 liters every single day. So there's so much water embedded in food as well. Additionally, imagine now this globalized food system, and in order to connect all of these different players, we need a huge amount of transportation and fuel to actually sustain that. Additionally, we need a huge amount of electricity to actually keep on using the warehouses and to get from A to Z as well. And the biggest problem of all, of course, is that all of this food that we're producing, the vast majority of that still today is going to landfills. And landfills, I don't know if you've ever been to a landfill, but it's the most unpleasant thing you could ever imagine. The smell, the look, everything around it. And you see things rotting, but the problem is that they don't decompose completely because of the lack of oxygen. And that means they're creating methane, which is up to 30 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas emitter. And that, of course, has a massive impact for our climate. And this is also why researchers and scientists have looked into what are the best solutions out there to combat climate change. And their conclusion was that food waste reduction is the #1 solution to combat climate change. No, it's not electric cars, it's not plant-based diets, it's not solar power or wind energy that we have to invest most of our time in. Yes, of course, they're important, but the #1 solution and the #1 action we should take is to reduce food waste. It really is the most simple, immediate, and impactful action we can take to combat climate change and to stay below 2 degrees warming. So now that I've told you about the problem, now you might be wondering, okay, why is this even happening? Like we realize this, but what is currently going on? And this is really the question that I was asking myself 4 years ago when I really started looking into this issue. And I really found out a lot of different things, and some of these things I would like to share with you now. The biggest problem of all is that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There's different reasons for why food is being lost or wasted across the supply chain. In lower income countries, in developing nations such as in Africa and Asia, the vast majority of food is being lost at the very start of the supply chain. Because very often they don't have the right infrastructure, the best practices, or really are facing adverse weather conditions due to climate change that really cause a lot of food to be just left on the farm. While in developed nations, we might have the right technology, we have all the right amount of warehouses, etc., the cool chain, everything is intact. So there should really be no food being lost. But the problem is that we as society have lost the respect for food. And that's why a lot of food is being wasted at home, in restaurants, and in supermarkets. So to give you one example, when I first started within the food waste realm, one would say, I did my master thesis in Copenhagen around the supply of potatoes, cause of so many people wasted. And the conclusion of that was that potatoes are wasted at the farm. Up to 30-40% of the whole production is just left on the farm because they don't adhere to the right size, shape, and color of what a potato should look like. So that means a crooked potato, or one that has, for example, a green patch on it, or that is a little bit deformed, might not be perfect in our eyes, is just being left behind because retailers no longer want to buy it, to just make sure consumers buy the perfect produce. And that has massive implications across the supply chain because so much food is being left behind. Another example I can give you is the work I've done with the Cool Chain Association. So together with airports and airlines, we tried to reduce the amount of food waste being wasted as well. So we looked at papayas being flown in from Brazil to Europe, and the vast majority of those papayas were wasted simply because they did not meet, or the temperature did not meet the requirements. That meant, if you saw on the graph on the right-hand side, is that the temperature from the start to the finish of the supply chain was changing so much, and these changes in temperatures were causing these fruits, for example, to perish and to spoil. So it basically means that we need a supply chain that has this fixed temperature across the board, and we need collaboration across all players so that we have this consistent temperature going forward in order for it not to spoil at the end. But again, here it is, who takes responsibility, who takes the first step, who looks into this technology to be able to do this. We have all the tools there, but it's just really about collaboration and making everything more transparent. Another example I can give you as well is my work that I did in Thailand and in the Maldives. The biggest issue here was the massive amount of buffets. If you have ever gone to a 5 or 6-star hotel, you will know that the massive amount of buffet, it's great, you have choice, etc. But you have to remember that a lot of this fresh produce that is brought onto the buffet never makes it back to the kitchen. And that means that a lot of it is just simply tossed straight away into the bin, ending up at the back of a hotel where people have to go and pick it up, like you see on the image, that then provide it to pigs. Yes, you may say it does not end up on landfill, but at the end of the day, this beautiful food that was cooked by these cooks and in these amounts is not meant to feed pigs. And often pigs can eat everything either. So it just shows that we are just producing a problem and just keep on sustaining it as we go on. The vast majority of food being wasted in Europe and in the US as well, though, is at home. So over 50%, the vast majority of it is wasted at home, and each and every one of us can make a difference. And that is really something extremely encouraging, but at the same time also challenging. Because why is actually so much waste happening at home? There's different reasons for this. And the best way I can explain this is with the 3 A's. The first one being abundance. Now, as society, we have really got this notion of always having full shelves, of always knowing the fact that I can go to the supermarket and I can always have a wide range and a wide choice of produce. And that also means that I no longer really respect and value the food in front of myself, because I can just go and waste it and go buy something else going forward. Additionally, food has become extremely cheap in developed nations. And that also meant that as we're becoming more affluent as a society, more and more developed, one could say, we are also spending less and less money on food. And because we're spending less money on food, we're losing the value of food within as well. And for me, the third and most important one as well is association, or actually disassociation from the very source of where food is coming from. Because food nowadays is within a globalized food system. We are getting avocados from Mexico, lemons from California, oranges from Morocco. We no longer know all the resources and all the effort that has gone into this produce. And that also means that we no longer feel ourselves linked or really feel ourselves attached to this food as well anymore. And that means we are very happy to just throw it away. So the question that arises is, okay, we know that each and every one of us has a role to play in this. So what can we do about it? And there's different ways of doing this. And the biggest advantage of this all is that it's really not rocket science. We don't need new technology. We don't need whole new solutions to come forward. It's simple changing our behaviors and our habits at home, such as planning ahead, looking what is in your inventory, doing a shopping list, and most importantly, not doing a shopping list and then forgetting it at home, but also taking it with you to the supermarket. Also really looking into how to store food properly, also to make sure that we use the entire produce instead of just cutting off a few ends. And to give you one example, date labeling, because date labeling is one of the biggest contributors of why so much food is being wasted at home. And why is that? Well, I'm sure you might have been in the similar situation where you look at a yogurt, you see the date on it, and you just say, well, this was passed 2 days ago, I might just throw it away. And there was a study that was actually recently done in Denmark that suggests that over 50% of all yogurts that are thrown away have never even been opened. So we rely on this date within it. So instead of opening it up and looking at it, smelling or tasting it, or using our senses for it, we simply rely on this date. And the problem with this date is that it's simply an indicator. It has nothing to do with food safety. It is simply there indicative to show people this is where the optimal food quality could be, but it still could be safe to eat afterwards. So what we did, we partnered with a lot of food producers, retailers such as Unilever, Nestle, Danone, to make sure to change their packaging as well and to adopt pictograms on this packaging to inform and also educate consumers to look, smell, and taste. So to give you a bit more information as well on what our core business is as Too Good To Go, what we did 5 years ago, what started 5 years ago has now become extremely scalable and extremely successful is our app. So what the app allows us to do is to connect businesses with food surplus, such as a restaurant, a bakery, with hungry consumers in the neighborhood. And if you download this app, you can download it in 15 different countries in Europe and now in the US as well. Through geolocalization, you can find out, okay, what cafe next door is where I can able to go save food. You can select that magic bag, which is then filled with great goodies that are about to go to waste. You reserve it, and then at a predestined time, you go and pick it up. And the best part of it all is the win-win-win scenario of this, because the big win for us as a consumer is that we get perfectly edible food that could have been sold at top value before, but we get it at a reduced price, usually 1/3 of the price. And also we get to discover new cafes in the neighborhood, and it's really, some people even call it the Google Maps of food, which was, a big one to fill in, but I think that kind of sums it up a little bit, because consumers are able to find great produce and great businesses around them. The big win for businesses, of course, is that they get extra revenue from not having to waste it, but they get revenue from that as well. And they can also attract new consumers. But most importantly for me as well is the biggest win is for the planet, because we make sure that all food produced is also food consumed. Edible food that might not be sold straight away during the day still has a life afterwards, and we can redistribute it to other people going forward. So we're working with restaurants, bakeries, hotels. It all started in Denmark 5 years ago. And now we have also started expanding into canteens, into wholesale, and working closer with industrials as well. And now we are really the world's largest B2C marketplace for surplus food. We're in 14 countries around Europe, now also launched in the US and Canada coming soon as well. We have saved over 69 million meals in total, and we have 36 million people using our app, while we have 86,500 individual partners who are saving food on a daily basis. So we can really see these numbers going up exponentially, and we are growing at a very fast scale. And we can really see that this app is able to be scaled across all markets going forward. But most importantly is that, yes, the marketplace is where we have the most direct impact, but we're so much more than an app, because we truly believe that we want to build a planet with no food waste by inspiring and empowering everyone to fight food waste together. We cannot do it alone. As an app, we will never be able to solve the food waste issue on itself. So we need to work with schools. We need to educate younger generations. We need to encourage and educate households and each and every one of us to do something about food waste. And most importantly, we also need to work with businesses and public authorities to make sure the right legislation and the right advocacy is done as well. If you want more information on food waste, what we created as well is the YouTube channel, where we created a lot of different content of where food is coming from, the people behind it, and also the impact it has on our planet. So feel free to go check that out as well. Most importantly, guys, I think what the biggest takeaway from this all is that food waste is indeed a big challenge, but the encouraging part of it all is that it will have a massive impact for our planet and climate change if we make sure to adopt it correctly and if we do something about it. Each and every one of us can do something, whether it's trying to get your local store to fight food waste, whether it's ourselves putting in the right habits and the right behaviors. Each one of us can do something about it. So let's fight food waste together.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much for this introduction to Good to Go. Lots of interesting facts, and I have a few questions, but I wanted to tell our audience, so please feel free to drop your questions wherever you're following us from, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, the questions will come through. So do comment and ask Philip your questions. And in the meantime, I might start myself. You shared a lot of interesting facts about food waste and unexpected facts as well, like how much food gets wasted for aesthetic reasons, for example. But I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what is the biggest misconception that we have around food waste? The one that, if we fix, could have the greatest impact?
To be honest, I think you pretty much touched upon it as well. I think I think imperfect produce is a massive, massive contributor. If you look at the entire supply chain, I think there's different reasons across the different parts of the supply chain. But if you want one reason of why food is being wasted across the supply chain, it really is those quality standards and those product specifications that we have in our heads. Even us as consumers, we say that a tomato has to be perfectly round, it needs to be red, not allowed to have any blemish. Most people don't even know that there are actually yellow, green, purple tomatoes out there, just because we have become so accustomed to having always this perfect produce in front of our eyes. And I think that's where we as consumers can definitely make a change and also empower ourselves to do something about it and to shift that. I think if we really address that properly, we have more than plenty of food to be able to be eaten, and that will definitely shift the whole food system.
Agreed. And I feel like it's a topic that relates with your three A's, of course, the association one especially. I feel like if you've ever had the experience of growing your own food at home, you'll know that it won't always look as perfect as you see it in supermarkets. Like we had a garden back at home, the tomatoes come in all forms, shapes. But I'm also unaware of the choices I make in the supermarket. For example, not picking the last tomato standing. So we'll have to make more efforts in that sense to overcome this these behaviors. All right, thanks for that. So you are the biggest player in the B2C market for food waste, as you called it. But I know that you also work with the supply chain indirectly, if I understand properly from that kind of graphic that you showed us. Then what is in our hands? So what can we as consumers do to lobby our suppliers and the supply chain to reduce food waste? And how can we do that in our day-to-day life?
It's a very good question. I think there's no simple answer to this, but most importantly is to really demand change. I definitely think that businesses will start moving forward once they see that demand is shifting and that people are expecting something different. I think plant-based diet is a good example. A lot of people would have never thought that one day we would have an alternative to milk, and now it's even going to discuss whether plant-based could also be called milk, etc. And that is just people shifting their diets and really trying to really address the problem as well and going heads on with that sort of scenario. So demand basically will also shift supply. So the best thing I can do, I would say in this kind of regard, going back to my previous example, is to go to the supermarkets and to really work hand in hand with them and say, yes, I'm absolutely happy to actually use the imperfect produce. This might sound stupid, but actually this is working in some countries already. In Denmark, we already have certain startups that are looking into imperfect produce to actually help get that to the market as well, where retailers are noticing that it is actually demanded and we can do something about it. So I think definitely we as consumers have a voice. Very often we feel a bit torn back and but what can I as one person do? But if everybody feels that way, we'll never move forward. But if each and every one of us feels, yes, I have a voice and I can vote, I can really lobby about this as well, we can really make a difference. So it does make a difference.
Thanks for that. And in the meantime, we had a couple of questions coming through. So I'm going to read Sophie's question. Hi, Sophie. Nice to meet you too. Too Good To Go is currently saving food at the end of the food chain when end consumers come in. Is there any plan to start saving food along the supply chain?
So definitely. So the reason why we really started at the end supply chain is because we are a very local business. So we want to make sure that we connect consumers to businesses that are in close proximation. And that is a bit the issue with saving food across the supply chain, because you have to remember that farms are usually now located outside of cities. So we would have to get consumers to go save food on the farm level. We tried it, we did testing for it, but it hasn't picked up the way we wanted it. So the way we're going about it now is to go step by step that direction. So as I mentioned, we're doing restaurants, bakeries, etc. Now we're also doing canteens. So with any business wanting to save food, they can also work with us in their canteens. But we're also working with industrials. That means, with warehouses from Unilever and Danone, Nestle, the whole lot, Kellogg's, where we're saving fruit from their warehouses as well. And we do direct pickup spots where we basically bring a truck, logistically bring it to a location, and people can go to a predefined time and go and pick it up. So in some countries where testing that out has become extremely successful, specifically for COVID times, where the food system has really shifted across. So we're doing that more and more and more, for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. The next question is something that I wanted to ask as well, since before this conversation we were talking about how much you miss Hong Kong. So what are your thoughts on expanding to Asia?
If you ask me personally, my thoughts are that definitely we should do it. Unfortunately, I'm not the one in that decision making or in that power to make those decisions. But the way you should look at it with Too Good To Go is that we really go about it very strategically, because it does take a lot of time to open an office. It needs a lot of resources, not only in terms of manpower, but also in terms of setting up a business in itself is not that easy, in terms of legislation, etc., due diligence, etc. So the way we did it was to first start in Europe, because we pretty much have within the EU, there's current systems that work in our advantage to be able to open offices that way, that quickly. And then the jump to the US was also a straightforward one, because we have a lot of partners who are demanding it. They said, we're selling food with you in Europe. When are you coming to the US? And I think that definitely told us to go there. But going forward, I definitely think that there is also a market for Too Good To Go in Asia. So I think in the near future, hopefully, that will be the case.
Do you think that from a B2C perspective, the audience, the market here is ready for Too Good To Go?
It's a good question. To be honest, we have not done enough research really into this kind of thing. But I've lived in Thailand, I've lived in Hong Kong, and I know how much food is still being wasted in restaurants. And I think the recent, well, not legislation, but the recent decision making from the Chinese authorities, from the top, from the president, suggested that restaurants should find people who don't eat all of the food that is on their plates in restaurants and don't take it home with them. And you can see that, yes, they are really addressing this issue full on, and they need solutions and they need the right ways to be able to save as much food as possible as well. Especially because in Asia and maybe more developing nations, you have the food insecurity aspect. So you don't just have the environment, but you really also have this food insecurity that says to people, we cannot waste food, because we have so many people, even in our own country, going to bed hungry. So it's simply unacceptable. So they're looking for these kind of solutions to be able to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do have some people here on the ground in Hong Kong. Daisy Tam was one of our guests on this series, the first one, that does a bit of that very locally with Hong Kong Food Works, rescuing food to redistribute it. So you touch upon a very important point. Yes, absolutely. Well, since we actually, sorry, I was deciding whether I should read our question or the audience first. I'll go with the one about the US, because we mentioned about expanding in different markets. We'd like to know, now that you are, starting your operations in the US, what do you think are going to be the one biggest challenge and the one biggest benefit to food waste reduction that you'll encounter in a market like the US?
I think the biggest challenge, or I think it's a challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity, is to really solve also the food insecurity part of it. Of course, we provide an app that is not just like a food bank, etc. But we also make sure to really work very closely with food banks and food donations to make sure that no food is going to waste. So redistribution is extremely key, and also the whole aspect of it go landfill. So we need the government on our side, and I think that might be a challenge because, well, not anymore. When the previous president, I think that would have been a bigger challenge. But I think now they're taking climate change more seriously, so we can see that those challenges will pave the way in order to become more sustainable. So I would say working closer with governmental authorities and also really solving that food insecurity issue. The biggest benefit for me that I would see, though, is that the US is extremely innovative. They're hungry for new ideas. They're looking for solutions, and they really go for it full on, full scale. I think unlike any other country in the world. So that is extremely encouraging, and we can see that already. That people really love the app and really love what we're doing. So we can see some really great momentum going on in the US.
Amazing. Yeah, we're really looking forward to see the developments of Too Good To Go in the US. Let's move on to Utkarsh's question. Different people have different appetites and diet. How does Too Good To Go personalize the experience for each user? And how does technology play a role in optimizing that process for the company?
So in terms of the diet, of course, that's a very important aspect to keep in mind. And we got that feedback actually from our consumers who were really also wanting to get more information of what is in the magic bags. We cannot always guarantee that if you go to a bakery that you will always have loaves of bread or that you will always have croissants. That really depends. But what we do want to guarantee, though, is that when you go to a shop and you are expecting, and it says in the description that it's vegetarian or vegan only, that you won't get meat at the end of the day because you are not going to eat it and that's going to go to waste, and that's the last thing we want. So we really want to make sure, specifically for vegan, vegetarian, but also allergies, that we note those down as well in the description. So it's very important when you go through the different places where you can say food, just to double check all of that to make sure that's all good. And if ever that doesn't apply, to contact us straight away, because that is extremely important to keep up the expectations in that sort of sense. So yeah.
Awesome. So it works a little bit like the food delivery apps where you can put your dietary requirements in there.
Awesome. I don't know if that has been completely adopted, if you can put the vegetarian in there yet, but you can definitely look for it. So if you know I'm vegetarian, I'm a vegan, then you can actively look for it. I don't think we have done the scroll down yet that you can only see it. I think that's going to come in very soon, though.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Well, Philippe, this was great, and we are right on time, I'd say. So I think we can probably conclude the episode here. And I really want to thank you for this presentation today. And I hope that we're going to have you soon for other episodes and for other conversations. We wish you a lot of, luck and success with your newest endeavor in the US. And I'm sure it's going to bring great things. I also want to say goodbye to our audience, and thanks for attending and for participating with your questions. A reminder to tune in next week for our next episode as well. And remember that you can fill out our feedback form for this episode to have the chance to win $150 gift card for our web shop. Also, we're giving away discount codes for our web shops for those of you that are attending. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And since we won't see you and talk to you before next week, happy Earth Day. Celebrate. Let us know how you're celebrating. And we'll see you next week for another food waste conversation. Once again, Philippe, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.